The Valorian war fleet moved through the darkness of space like a silver blade cutting through black silk. Supreme Commander Vothrak stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the blue-green planet grow larger on the viewing screen. Earth, the 48th world that would fall before the might of the Valorian Empire. He turned to his tactical officer, Genitara, who stood at attention beside the strategic display. Report. Vothrak commanded Zenta, activated the holographic projection, and multiple data streams appeared in the air between them. Intelligence confirms initial assessment. Commander, she said, her voice steady and precise as all Valorian officers were trained to speak. The humans have no unified military command, and their defensive structures are scattered across multiple independent nations. Vothrak nodded slowly and studied the tactical data with the practiced eye of a commander who had never known defeat. The Empire had conquered 47 species using the same methodical approach and overwhelming force. Every previous species had followed predictable patterns. When faced with Valorian superiority, they fortified their strongest positions, or they retreated to defensible locations, or they attempted to negotiate from positions of weakness. The weakness, the humans appeared to be doing none of these things, and also all of these things at the same time. Their military doctrine is contradictory. Genitara continued, highlighting several sections of intercepted human communications. Some forces are advancing while others retreat, and many appear to be repositioning without clear strategic purpose. Admiral Krevnos, who had arrived from the Imperial High Command to observe the conquest, stepped forward from his position near the command throne. His presence made even Vothrak slightly uncomfortable, though he would never show such weakness. This disorder is their fatal flaw, Krevnos announced with certainty. 47 worlds have fallen because the Empire brings order to chaos, and these humans are drowning in their own lack of coordination. Vothrak agreed, but something about the tactical display troubled him in a way he could not name. The human defense network looked like it had been designed by dozens of different minds with no communication between them. Ships moved in patterns that violated every principle of efficient military movement. Stations broadcast on frequencies that overlapped and interfered with each other. Ground forces appeared to be receiving conflicting orders from multiple command structures. Scan the surface again, Vothrak ordered. I want confirmation of their primary command center. The tactical officer worked at her console for several moments before looking up with an expression of confusion. Commander, we have identified 17 locations that match the profile of a central command facility, and they are all active simultaneously. Impossible, Admiral Krevnos said sharply. No military can function with 17 command centers, and this only proves their disorganization. Vothrak was not so certain, but he had his orders from the Empire, and 47 successful conquests had proven Valorian methods worked. Deploy scout ships, he commanded. Standard reconnaissance pattern, and report any deviations from expected human defensive behavior. The scout vessels launched and moved toward Earth's orbital space with practiced precision. Each ship knew its role, and each pilot followed the exact protocols that had been refined through decades of conquest on Earth's surface and in the orbital stations around the planet. A very different kind of preparation was taking place. Captain Daniel Hughes sat in what the Valorians would have called a command center, but what was really just a converted cargo bay on the Lunar Defense Station. He watched the alien ships approach. On his monitor, while eating a sandwich, they're doing exactly what we thought they would, Lieutenant Karen Price said from her position at the communications console. Formation Delta 7. Scout pattern consistent with their last 3 invasions. Daniel nodded and took another bite of his sandwich. Had spent the last month studying every available piece of intelligence on the Valorian Empire. They were good, and they were powerful, and they were also completely predictable. Send out response package 3. He said. Karen's fingers moved across her keyboard, and suddenly the communications Channels filled with noise. Thousands of messages in hundreds of languages began broadcasting toward the approaching Valorian fleet. Some were defiant declarations of resistance, and others were offers of immediate surrender. Many were just random noise or music or incomprehensible signals that meant nothing at all to the Valorian flagship. The communications officer looked up from his station with wide eyes. "Commander, we are receiving multiple responses to our approach, and they are not consistent." Vothrak frowned and moved to examine the incoming data. "What do you mean, not consistent?" "Some signals indicate they wish to negotiate, while others threaten military action, and many appear to be civilian broadcasts that acknowledge our presence but take no clear position." Janitara studied the communications data with growing interest. "Commander, this is unusual, and every previous species has responded with either unified defiance or unified surrender." Admiral Krevnos waved his hand dismissively. "This is exactly what we expected from a disordered species, and they cannot even agree among themselves how to respond to our arrival." Vothrak wanted to agree, but his instincts told him something was wrong. He had not survived 47 conquests by ignoring his instincts. Tactical analysis. He commanded, "If this disorder is genuine, what are the expected defensive patterns?" Janitara worked at her console and brought up predictive models. "If their chaos is real, we should observe conflicting defense deployments and resource waste through duplication of effort and poor communication between military units. And if their chaos is not real?" Vothrak asked quietly. The bridge fell silent, and even Admiral Krevnos turned to look at the Supreme Commander. "Then we cannot predict their behavior because there is no pattern to analyze." Janitara said slowly. Vothrak studied the tactical display where the blue-green planet rotated peacefully below his fleet Earth. Looked vulnerable, and its defenses appeared scattered and weak. But something about the way those defenses were positioned bothered him. They were not where Valorian tactical doctrine said they should be. "Begin standard siege formation." He ordered all ships to designated positions and prepare for invasion. Protocol 7. The Valorian fleet moved with mechanical precision, and each vessel took its assigned position in a formation that had broken the defenses of 47 worlds on Earth. Daniel Hughes watched the enemy fleet arrange itself in orbit. "They're doing it," he said with a slight smile. "Formation exactly as predicted." Karen looked up from her console, where she had been coordinating with defense units across the planet. "All teams report ready, and everyone knows their individual assignments." "Good," Daniel said and finished his sandwich. "Remember, the key is that nobody follows anyone else's playbook, and every unit fights their own way." Sergeant Peter Cole's voice came through the communication channel from his position on a defense platform near Mars. "Sir, are you sure about this plan? It feels wrong to have no unified strategy." Daniel smiled because he knew exactly what Peter meant. Every military officer was trained to think in terms of unified command and coordinated strategies. What he was asking his people to do violated every principle they had ever learned. "Trust me, Sergeant," Daniel said. "The Valorians have studied how armies fight, and we're not going to give them an army to study." On the Valorian flagship, the communications officer suddenly looked up with alarm. "Commander, the humans are broadcasting their surrender terms." "Excellent," Admiral Krevnos said with satisfaction. "Begin transmission of our acceptance and prepare boarding parties." "Sir," the officer said nervously, "they have sent us 43 different surrender documents, and none of them agree on the terms." Vothrak felt a cold sensation in his chest. "What do you mean they do not agree?" "Some offer complete capitulation, while others propose partial surrender of specific territories, and several appear to be counteroffers demanding we surrender to them, and at least 6 are written in languages our translators cannot identify." Janitara looked at her commander with an expression he had never seen on a Valorian officer's face before. "Uncertainty, Commander. she said quietly. "I cannot determine which signals are genuine." Admiral Krevnos stepped forward angrily. "This is absurd, and they are simply too disorganized to coordinate even their own surrender." But Vothrak was staring at the tactical display, where human ships were moving in patterns that made no mathematical sense, and for the first time in his career, he wondered if perfect order might not be enough to defeat perfect chaos. The invasion began at exactly 0600 hours, Galactic Standard Time. The Valorian Empire had initiated military operations at this precise moment for 300 years, and it had always brought success. Supreme Commander Vothrak watched his tactical. Always brought success. Supreme Commander Vothrak watched his task. Supreme Commander Vothrak watched his tactical display as the first wave of assault ships launched from the fleet. Each vessel followed its designated flight path, and each pilot executed the maneuvers exactly as programmed. Everything proceeded according to the invasion protocols for exactly 47 minutes. Then the chaos began. First indication of trouble came from Scout Captain Yurthan, who was leading an advanced squadron toward Earth's orbital defense grid. "Command, this is Scout 7. His voice came through the communication channel with unusual tension. "We are encountering defensive satellites, but their behavior does not match standard combat protocols." Vothrak leaned forward in his command throne. "Explain." "They are not firing in coordinated patterns, and some appear to be broadcasting entertainment signals while simultaneously launching missiles, and their positioning seems random rather than strategic." Genitara brought up the tactical feed from Scout 7's sensors. What she saw made her pause. Human defense satellites were indeed firing at the Valorian ships, but not in any pattern that made tactical sense. Some fired immediately, while others waited for seemingly random intervals. One satellite was broadcasting what their translators identified as classical music, while it launched missiles at irregular timing. Adjust targeting computers to account for irregular firing patterns, Vothrak ordered. All ships are to maintain standard assault formation, but the computers could not adjust because there was no pattern to account for on the lunar defense station. Lieutenant Karen Price watched her monitors with satisfaction. "The randomization protocols are working perfectly," she said to Captain Daniel Hughes. "Their targeting systems are designed to predict firing patterns, and we're not giving them any patterns to predict." Daniel nodded while he reviewed reports from defensive units across the solar system. Each unit was operating independently with only the loosest coordination. Some were aggressive and others defensive, and many were doing things that would never appear in any military textbook. "How's Jake doing with the station defenses?" Daniel asked. Karen pulled up the communication feed from Commander Jake Morrison, who was coordinating the defense of the civilian space stations around Earth. "He's got mining crews using ore processing equipment as improvised weapons, and one tourist station is launching escape pods filled with scrap metal at the Valorian ships. Is it working?" "The Valorians don't know how to respond to it," Karen said with a grin. "Their tactical computers keep trying to classify the threats, and they can't because we're using things that aren't supposed to be weapons in space." The Valorian assault continued, but nothing was going according to plan. The human ships moved in flight patterns that seemed to violate basic physics and tactical sense. One vessel would accelerate directly at a Valorian cruiser, then suddenly veer away at the last moment. Another would fly in slow circles while firing at random intervals. A third appeared to be fleeing before abruptly reversing course and launching a full attack. "I cannot predict their movements," Genitara admitted to her commander. "Every ship appears to be operating under different tactical assumptions." Admiral Krevnos was losing his patience. "They have no discipline and no coordination. Order our ships to exploit their chaos and destroy them individually, but individual Valorian ships were discovering that chaos was harder to exploit than order. When they targeted a human vessel that appeared to be retreating, it would suddenly attack from an unexpected angle, when they prepared for an aggressive assault, the human ship would scatter their forces with evasive maneuvers that made no logical sense. Sergeant Peter Cole was leading a Marine defense unit on one of the orbital platforms when the first Valorian boarding party arrived. He watched the enemy ships approach in perfect formation and smiled. "All right, everyone. Remember what the captain said," Peter told his squad through their helmet communications. "We don't fight like they expect us to fight." The Valorian Marines breached the station's hull with precision and moved through the corridors in textbook assault formation. They expected to encounter human defenders at strategic choke points. Instead, they found empty corridors with doors that opened and closed randomly. Then they encountered resistance from directions that should not have been possible. Peter's squad had abandoned standard defensive positions entirely. Some Marines were hiding in maintenance shafts and others in storage compartments. One soldier was literally inside a wall using a maintenance access space that the Valorians did not know existed. "Contact left," a Valorian soldier shouted as Peter's team opened fire from a ventilation grate. The aliens returned fire with disciplined precision, but the humans had already moved. They appeared from a supply closet and fired several shots. Before disappearing again, the Valorian squad leader tried to coordinate a response, but his soldiers were trained to fight enemies that held positions and defended logically. These humans were everywhere and nowhere on the Valorian flagship. The tactical reports were becoming increasingly confusing. "Engineering Base 7 has been secured," one report stated. "Human resistance was minimal, and the facility is ours." 3 minutes later, that same engineering bay exploded. The humans had rigged it with explosives, but not on any kind of timer that Valorian scanners could detect. The Lisa Grant had designed the psychological warfare protocols, and she was enjoying their effectiveness from her position on Earth's surface. She monitored the intercepted Valorian communications. "They're getting frustrated," she told Daniel through the secure channel. "Their commanders keep demanding status reports, and their field units keep giving contradictory information. Because we keep changing our tactics," Daniel said. "Exactly. And they're trained to identify enemy patterns and then exploit those patterns. But we're not giving them any patterns." Lisa pulled up her analysis of Valorian military psychology. "Their entire culture is built on precision and predictability. And when they encounter something truly random, they interpret it as a mistake rather than a strategy." On the command deck, Captain Daniel Hughes made a decision. "Karen, send out Signal Package 7. Karen smiled and activated the next phase of their communication strategy. Suddenly, the Valorian fleet began receiving thousands of signals from Earth. Some were clearly military communications, and others appeared to be civilian broadcasts. Many seemed to be encrypted tactical data, and several were just videos of cats doing amusing things. The Valorian communications officers tried desperately to filter the important messages from the noise, but there was no way to tell which was which because the humans were deliberately mixing military and civilian signals. "This is information warfare," Genetara said as she studied the signal analysis. "They are overwhelming our processing systems with data. Then filter it," Admiral Krevnos commanded. "Filter everything except confirmed military frequencies." The communications officer did as ordered, and suddenly 90% of the human signals disappeared from their screens. 3 minutes later, a human strike force appeared exactly where one of those filtered civilian signals had indicated. The signal about cats had actually been encrypted. Tactical Coordinate Tasvok stood and walked to the main viewing screen where Earth rotated peacefully. His fleet had been engaged with human forces for 6 hours in that time. They should have secured at least 30% of the strategic objectives. Instead, they held less than 10%, and even those positions were under constant harassment. Analysis, he demanded. Zintar brought up the tactical summary with reluctance. "Commander, we have successfully engaged human forces in 47 separate encounters, but we have not been able to predict their responses in any of them. Every species has patterns, Lothrak said, though his voice lacked its usual certainty. Even chaos has patterns, not human chaos. Genitara replied quietly. She brought up a compilation of human tactical maneuvers from the last 6 hours. No, 2 encounters showed the same approach. One battle had involved human ships attacking in perfect formation. The next battle saw those same ships scattered across space with no apparent coordination. A third engagement featured humans using ramming tactics. A fourth showed them avoiding any direct contact at all. They are adapting to each situation independently. Genitara continued. Every ship, every station, every squad appears to be making its own decisions about how to fight. Admiral Krevnos slammed his fist on the tactical console. That is impossible. No military can function without central command. But even as he said it, he was watching human forces coordinate a counterattack against 3 Valorian positions simultaneously. Each attack used completely different tactics. Each attack was being executed by forces that appeared to have no communication with each other. And each attack was succeeding on the lunar station. Daniel Hughes received reports from across the solar system. Peter Coles. Marines had retaken the orbital platform, using entry points the Valorians never saw coming. Jake Morrison's civilian stations had destroyed 2 Valorian frigates using mining equipment and creative engineering. Current prices. Communication warfare had tied up half the enemy fleet trying to decode signals that were sometimes meaningless noise. Sir, Karen said, we're receiving a transmission from the Valorian flagship, and it's a formal. Admiral Krevnos stood in the strategic planning chamber aboard the Valorian flagship and stared at the holographic battle recordings with disbelief. 3 days had passed since the invasion began. 3 days during which the Valorian Empire had lost more ships than in the previous decade of conquests. Explain this, he demanded, pointing at a recording that showed a human vessel executing a maneuver that violated every principle of efficient combat. Supreme Commander Vothrak had no explanation. He had reviewed the tactical data hundreds of times, and each review left him more confused than before. Tactical Officer Genitara stepped forward with her analysis tablet. Her movements were precise as always, but there was something different in her expression. Doubt. Admiral, I have completed a comprehensive study of human tactical approaches, she said. In 127 separate engagements, we have documented 127 distinct tactical methodologies. That proves their lack of coordination. Krevnos said sharply. Actually, Admiral, I believe it proves the opposite. Genitara replied, her voice steady despite contradicting a superior officer. I believe the humans are deliberately employing chaos as their primary strategy. The room fell silent. Vothrak looked at his tactical officer with new interest while Krevnos seemed ready to explode with anger. You are suggesting that disorder is a strategy? The Admiral demanded. I am suggesting that for humans, disorder may be their natural state, and they have learned to weaponize it against opponents who rely on predictability. Genitara activated the holographic display and showed a compilation of human combat footage. Observe. In this engagement, the humans attacked in perfect formation, but in this engagement, those same forces scattered randomly, and in this third encounter, they used tactics that appear to have been invented during the battle itself. Vothrak studied the recordings with the focus of a career military commander. He had spent 40 years learning to read enemy tactics and predict their responses. But these humans were unlike anything he had encountered. What do you recommend? He asked. Genitara hesitated before answering. Commander, I recommend we consider the possibility that humanity cannot be conquered using traditional Valorian methods. Admiral Krevnos stepped between them. Unacceptable. The Empire has never failed to conquer a species, and we will not fail now. Order. All forces to increase aggression and overwhelm the humans with superior numbers. On Earth's surface, Dr. Lisa Grant was presenting her own analysis to the Defense Coordination Team Captain Daniel. Hughes watched the psychological profile she had compiled on Valorian military culture. They are trained from birth to value order above all else, Lisa explained. Their education system, their social structures, even their art forms all emphasize precision and predictability. And that's their weakness, Daniel said. Exactly. When confronted with genuine randomness, they cannot process it, and they interpret chaos as error rather than intention. Lieutenant Karen Price looked up from her communications console. We're intercepting increased Valorian communications traffic, and it looks like they're planning a major offensive. Against what target? Daniel asked. Against everywhere. Karen replied. They're abandoning tactical precision in favor of overwhelming force. Daniel nodded slowly. He had expected this response when precision failed. Most military commanders defaulted to brute force. All right, signal all defense units. He ordered Phase 3 begins now and everyone knows what to do. Karen smiled and sent the coded message that would trigger the next stage of humanity's chaotic defense across the solar system. Human commanders received the signal and each interpreted it in their own way. Commander Jake Morrison at the civilian stations read the message and immediately ordered his forces to increase their improvisation. Sergeant Peter Cole received it while leading a counterattack on a Valorian-held asteroid. Mason decided to try a tactic he had been considering: thousands of independent decisions made by thousands of independent minds, all working toward the same goal but using completely different methods. The Valorian assault began with textbook precision. Admiral Krevnos had committed additional fleets from neighboring systems. The combined force represented the largest military operation the Empire had mounted in 20 years. 300 warships advanced on Earth's lunar installations. In perfect formation, each ship knew its role, and each commander followed the battle plan exactly. Jake Morrison watched them approach and felt a moment of genuine fear. The sheer size of the Valorian fleet was terrifying. Then he remembered that humans had faced terrifying odds before and won by refusing to be predictable. All stations. This is Morrison. He broadcast to the civilian defense network. Forget everything I taught you about coordinated defense and fight however you think will work best. The response was immediate and chaotic. One station opened fire with every weapon system simultaneously. Another launched all its escape pods and shuttles in different directions as decoys. A third station went completely dark and silent. A fourth began broadcasting music at maximum volume. The Valorian tactical computers attempted to analyze the defensive response and failed completely. Each station was doing something different, and there was no pattern to exploit. Admiral Krevnos watched his perfectly coordinated assault dissolve into confusion as his ships tried to respond to dozens of unique threats. Maintain formation, he ordered, but maintaining formation against an enemy that refused to behave predictably was impossible. One Valorian cruiser focused on destroying what appeared to be a weapons platform. The platform exploded spectacularly when hit. Too spectacularly. The human defenders had rigged it with far more explosives than necessary, and the blast damaged 3 nearby Valorian ships. Another Valorian vessel pursued what its sensors identified as a fleeing human cargo ship. The cargo ship led them directly through a debris field where human marines had positioned improvised mines. Sophisticated military ordnance, but simple explosive charges attached to random pieces of space junk. Sergeant Peter Cole's assault on the Valorian-held asteroid was going better than expected. He had divided his Marines into 5 teams with no coordination between them. Each team was told to reach the central command center using whatever route and tactics they preferred. The Valorians were defending the asteroid using standard protocols. They had fortified the main access corridors and positioned troops at strategic choke points. She were prepared for a coordinated assault from multiple directions. Peter's First team went through the front door using overwhelming firepower. The Valorians responded exactly as expected and reinforced that position, Peters. Second team found a mining tunnel that the Valorians did not know existed and entered through the asteroid's mineral processing facility. His third team used magnetic climbing equipment to approach from an angle the Valorians had not considered. The fourth team did not enter the asteroid at all, but instead hacked into the base's environmental systems from outside. The fifth team waited 30 minutes and then called the base asking for directions to the cafeteria. The Valorian defenders did not know how to respond to 5 simultaneous attacks using 5 completely different approaches. Their training had prepared them for coordinated assaults, where they could predict the enemy's next move. These humans were not coordinated, and their next moves seemed random. Peters. Teams converged on the command center from 5 different directions. At 5 different times, the Valorians never established a solid defensive line because they could not predict where the next attack would come from on the Valorian flagship. Vothrak listened to the disaster reports with growing alarm. The massive assault was failing, not because the humans had superior technology or greater numbers. It was failing because Valorian forces could not coordinate an effective response to an enemy that refused to be coordinated. Pull back, he ordered quietly. Admiral Krevnos turned to him with fury. We will not retreat. The Empire does not retreat. We are not retreating, Vothrak said, his voice cold and firm. We are repositioning to analyze this enemy more effectively, and our current tactics are ineffective. Your current tactics are ineffective because you are too cautious. Krevnos shouted. I am relieving you of command, and I will personally lead the final assault. Janitara watched this exchange with concern. She had served under Vothrak for 15 years and trusted his judgment, but she also knew that Admiral Krevnos had the authority to replace any field commander. The Admiral took the command throne and immediately began issuing orders. All ships advance to Earth orbit and prepare for planetary assault, and we will crush this chaos with overwhelming Imperial might. The Valorian fleet surged forward with renewed aggression. Every ship accelerated toward Earth at maximum speed on the lunar station. Daniel Hughes watched the enemy fleet approach and felt his stomach tighten. They're committing everything, Karen said quietly. Total assault on Earth itself. Daniel nodded and opened a communication channel to every human defense unit in the solar system. This is Hughes, he said calmly. The enemy is coming, and they expect us to either run or unite under central command, and we're going to do neither. He paused and looked at the screen where Earth rotated peacefully. Fight however you want, and fight wherever you want, and trust your own judgment, and show these aliens that human chaos is stronger than their order. The Valorian fleet surrounded Earth like a steel net, closing around a fragile sphere of blue and green. Admiral Krevnos stood on the bridge and surveyed the tactical display with satisfaction. 300 warships in perfect formation, the largest military force the Empire had assembled in decades, begin the final assault. He commanded. What happened next would be studied by military historians for generations, not because of its brilliance, but because of its sheer impossibility. The humans did not retreat, and they did not unite, and they did not surrender. Instead, they did something that no Valorian computer could have predicted. They fought as individuals. Every ship became its own tactical unit. Every station its own command center. Every squad its own army. Lieutenant Karen Price coordinated what could barely be called coordination from the lunar station. I'm not giving orders, she explained to Captain Daniel Hughes. I'm making suggestions and sending out ideas and letting everyone decide what works for them. Daniel watched his tactical screen where hundreds of human vessels moved through space. No 2 ships flew the same pattern. No 2 stations used the same defensive strategy. It was chaos beautiful. Terrifying. Effective chaos. One human destroyer charged directly at a Valorian battlecruiser while broadcasting classical music from Earth's 18th century. The Valorian ship prepared for a ramming attack at the last second. The human ship veered away and launched a spread of missiles from an unexpected angle. The Valorian point defense systems were positioned to stop a frontal assault. They were not prepared for missiles coming from above and behind. Another human vessel appeared to be fleeing. At maximum speed, 3 Valorian fighters pursued the human ship, led them into a debris field where Commander Jake Morrison's civilian stations had positioned improvised weapon shipping containers filled with ball bearings, construction equipment, modified to launch metal fragments. Even waste disposal units repurposed as projectile weapons. None of it was military grade, but all of it was deadly when moving at orbital velocities. The Valorian fighters were destroyed by garbage. Admiral Krevnos watched his carefully planned assault dissolve into 1,000 separate skirmishes. "This is unacceptable," he shouted. "They have no discipline, no coordination. How are they winning?" Tactical Officer Janatara had been studying the battle closely. She understood now what Supreme Commander Vothrek had seen. What made the Valorian Empire strong was making them weak against humanity. "Admiral, our forces are trained to fight armies," she said carefully. "The humans are not fighting as an army, and they are fighting as individuals who support each other without requiring central command." "Nonsense. No force can function without command structure." The humans appeared to disagree. Janatara replied on the surface of Earth. Dr. Lisa Grant was broadcasting directly to the Valorian fleet, not to their commanders, but to their individual soldiers, Valorian warriors. A voice carried the translation software's interpretation into their language. "You have been told that you fight for order, and you have been told that chaos is weakness. But look at what your perfect order has achieved, and 3 days of fighting and you control almost nothing." In a Valorian troop transport, young soldiers listened to her words. They had been taught since childhood that the Empire's way was the only way, but they had also seen the last 3 days of combat. They had seen human defenders who should have been easy to defeat. They had watched as perfect Valorian tactics failed against imperfect human improvisation. "Your commanders tell you to maintain formation while you die," Lisa continued. "The humans you fight are told to survive by any means necessary, and they adapt while you repeat the same. Failed strategies." Admiral Krevnos ordered the broadcast jammed, but it was too late. Seeds of doubt had been planted on one of Earth's orbital platforms. Sergeant Peter Cole was defending against a Valorian boarding party. His SQUAD had abandoned the defensive positions entirely. One Marine was firing from inside a ventilation shaft. Another was hiding in a storage locker. Peter himself was positioned on top of an equipment rack where no Valorian tactical manual would suggest looking. The Valorian Marines advanced through the corridor in perfect formation. Their training was flawless, and their execution was precise. Peter watched them pass below his position and smiled. "Now," he whispered into his communications unit. His squad opened fire from 6 different directions. The Valorians responded with disciplined precision, and they returned fire at the most obvious threats and moved to cover positions that their training had taught them. But Peter's Marines were not in obvious positions, and they were not following any training manual. One soldier crawled through a maintenance tunnel and appeared behind them. Valorian line. Another dropped from a ceiling panel. The aliens had not noticed the Valorians fought bravely and skillfully, but they were fighting an enemy that refused to be where they expected. Commander Jake Morrison had an idea that he knew was completely insane, which made it perfect for fighting the Valorians' engineering. He called to his team, "Can we rig the station to spin?" His chief engineer looked at him like he had lost his mind. "The station is not designed to rotate, and why would we want to spin?" "Because the Valorians will expect us to maintain stable orientation," Jake explained. "And if we start rotating unpredictably, their boarding craft will not be able to match our spin." The engineer thought about it for a moment, then grinned. That is the stupidest tactical idea I have ever heard. Will it work? Probably not, but let's try it anyway. 10 minutes later, Jake's civilian station began to rotate on 3 different axes simultaneously. Valorian assault ships that were approaching found themselves unable to dock. Their automated systems were designed for stable targets. The rotating station defied those systems inside the station. Jake's crew had strapped themselves to their posts and were laughing at the chaos they had created. Some were getting sick from the rotation, but they were also watching Valorian assault craft bounce off their docking ports on the Valorian flagship. The reports were getting worse. 40% of the assault force was committed, but only 15% of objectives were secured. Human defenders were using tactics that seemed invented on the spot. Nothing in the Valorian tactical database could predict what the humans would do next. Admiral Krevnos was losing control. Commit the reserves, he ordered. All remaining ships are to enter combat immediately. Genitara spoke up despite knowing she risked punishment. Admiral, we should consider withdrawal and regroup and analyze the human tactics more thoroughly. We do not retreat from primitives, Krevnos shouted, but even as he said it, another Valorian cruiser reported catastrophic damage. A human cargo vessel had rammed it while carrying a load of industrial explosives. The explosion had taken out the cruiser and damaged 2 escort frigates. No military commander would sacrifice a ship in a kamikaze attack, except the cargo ship had been abandoned. The humans had programmed it to fly remotely while the crew escaped in pods. Creative, unpredictable, effective. Captain Daniel Hughes watched the battle from the lunar station and felt exhausted. 3 days of constant fighting, 3 days of improvisation and adaptation. His people were tired, but they were also winning. Karen, how are our forces holding up? Scattered reports from everywhere, she replied. Some units are low on ammunition, and others are using captured Valorian weapons, and one station reports they have run out of missiles and switched to throwing pieces of debris manually. Daniel almost laughed. The idea of defending against a space fleet by throwing objects manually was absurd. It was also exactly the kind of human solution that the Valorians would never anticipate. Tell all units to maintain current tactics, he ordered. Keep them confused and keep them guessing. Admiral Krevnos made his final decision. Prepare the planetary bombardment weapons, he commanded. If we cannot conquer Earth, we will destroy it. Genitara felt horror wash over her. The Empire had never resorted to planetary destruction. It was wasteful and violated every principle of conquest, but she understood why the Admiral had made this choice. Could not admit defeat, he could not return to the High Command and report that humanity had won through chaos, so he would eliminate the evidence. Admiral, I must protest, she said. The Empire does not destroy viable worlds. The Empire does not lose to primitives. Krevnos replied coldly. Charge the main weapons on Earth. Warning klaxons sounded across every defense station. Sensors had detected the Valorian bombardment weapons powering up. Daniel Hughes felt his blood run cold. This was not part of the plan. Humanity could fight chaos against order, but they could not fight against planetary annihilation. All forces, he broadcast on every channel, fall back to Earth and prepare for evacuation protocols. But even as he gave the order, he knew it was hopeless. There was nowhere to evacuate to. And then something unexpected happened, something that would change the course of the battle and perhaps the future of both species. A single Valorian ship broke formation. Tactical officer Jantara had made a decision. She had served the Empire faithfully for 20 years, but she would not serve genocide. All Valorian vessels, she broadcast on the fleet-wide channel. This is Tactical Officer Genitara with priority override command, and I am ordering immediate ceasefire and withdrawal. Admiral Krevnos turned to her with rage. You have no authority. I have the authority of an officer who refuses to commit atrocities. Genitara replied, and I believe many of our forces agree with me. She was right. The silence after the battle was strange and uncomfortable. For 3 days, space around Earth had been filled with weapons fire and explosions and frantic communications. Now, there was only the quiet hum of ships maintaining position and the occasional status report. Supreme Commander Vothrak had retaken command of the Valorian fleet after Admiral Krevnos was placed under arrest. He stood on the bridge and looked at the planet that had defeated the Empire. Not through superior technology, not through greater numbers, but through something the Valorians had never encountered before: pure, weaponized chaos. A communication request came through from the human force. Voth accepted it and found himself facing Captain Daniel Hughes on the holographic display. The human looked tired. His uniform was wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes, but he smiled. Commander Vothrak, Daniel said through the translation software, I believe we should talk. I agree. Vothrak replied. He had spent the last 6 hours reviewing every moment of the failed invasion. He had studied human tactics until his eyes burned, and he had finally understood. You never intended to fight us in a traditional battle, he said. Daniel nodded. Your empire has conquered 47 species using the same methods, and you are very good at what you do, and we knew we could not beat you at your own game. So you changed the game entirely. We played a different game. Daniel corrected, one where the rules kept changing, and where every player made their own decisions. Vothrak felt something he had not experienced in his long military career: respect for an enemy. I have a question for you, Captain, he said. Your forces had no central command and no unified strategy, and by every military principle we know, you should have been defeated easily, and yet you won. How? Daniel leaned back in his chair and thought about his answer. Commander, can I ask you a question first? Vothrak nodded. In the Valorian military, what happens when a soldier encounters a situation that is not covered by their training? They consult their commanding officer. Vothrak replied immediately. And if the commanding officer is unavailable, they follow the most applicable protocol from their training. And if no protocol applies? Vothrak paused. He had never considered that question, because there was always a protocol. The Empire had refined their military doctrine over centuries. Every possible combat situation had been analyzed and cataloged. There is always a protocol, he said. Daniel smiled sadly. That is why you lost, and when our soldiers encounter something new, they improvise, and they adapt, and they create solutions that nobody has ever thought of before. That is chaos. That is freedom, Daniel replied. On the lunar station, Dr. Lisa Grant was preparing her psychological analysis of the Valorian forces. Lieutenant Karen Price sat beside her and reviewed the intercepted communications from the enemy fleet. They are struggling to understand what happened, Lisa said. Their entire worldview is based on the idea that order is superior to chaos, but we proved that wrong. Karen said. Did we? Lisa asked. Or did we just prove that different approaches work in different situations? Karen considered that. You think the Valorian way has value? I think any culture that has survived for thousands of years must have something valuable, Lisa replied. Their order and precision allowed them to build an empire that spans hundreds of worlds, and that is an achievement we should respect, even as we defend against it. On a Valorian medical ship, Tactical Officer Janitaro was being questioned by military investigators. She had committed what the Empire considered the ultimate crime. She had disobeyed a direct order from a superior officer. Why did you give the stand-down order? The investigator asked. Gintara met his eyes without flinching. Because Admiral Krevnos was about to commit planetary genocide, and because our forces were dying for nothing, and because I swore an oath to serve the Empire, not to follow orders blindly. The Empire requires obedience. The Empire requires thinking soldiers. Janitara replied, I spent 3 days watching human forces defeat us through individual initiative and adaptive thinking, and perhaps we should learn from that. The investigator made notes on his tablet. Your fate will be decided by the High Command, he said, but I will note in my report that many officers support your actions. After he left, Janitara sat alone in the small room and thought about the humans. They had shown her something she had never imagined, that chaos could have purpose, that individuals could be stronger together than apart, that sometimes the best strategy was to have no strategy at all. Sergeant Peter Cole was helping repair one of the orbital platforms that had been damaged in the fighting. His Marines worked alongside civilian engineers and volunteers. Nobody was following an official work schedule. Everyone just did what needed to be done. Sergeant, one of his Marines called out, the Valorian ship is requesting permission to send over medical supplies. Peter looked at the young soldier with surprise. They want to help us? Apparently, and their message says they have wounded who need treatment. 2. And they are asking if we can share medical resources. Peter thought about it for a moment. 3 days ago, these same Valorians had been trying to kill him now. They were offering help and asking for help. Tell them yes, he decided, and ask if they need engineering assistance with their damaged ships. Commander Jake Morrison was dealing with a different kind of chaos. The aftermath, his civilian stations had fought bravely, but many were damaged. Supplies were low and people were exhausted, and now he had to figure out how to repair everything. A communication came through from Earth's surface. Commander Morrison, this is the Global Relief Coordination Center, and we have supplies ready for your stations, but our transport schedules are completely disorganized, and can you help coordinate distribution? Jake laughed after 3 days of fighting through deliberate chaos. Someone was asking him to organize relief efforts. I will see what I can do, he replied. Then he had an idea. Actually, send the supplies up on whatever schedule works, and we will figure out distribution as they arrive. And every station can take what they need. That sounds inefficient, the coordinator said. That sounds human, Jake replied with a smile. Captain Daniel Hughes met with Supreme Commander Vothrak again 2 days after the fighting stopped. This time the meeting was in person. Valorian shuttle brought the alien commander to the lunar station. Daniel watched him arrive with mixed feelings. This was the being who had ordered the invasion of Earth, but this was also a military officer who had shown honor in defeat. They met in a conference room that had been hastily prepared for the occasion. Vothrak entered and looked around with interest. Room was functional, but decorated with random objects, a painting of Earth's oceans, a model of an old sailing ship, a plant growing in a small pot. Your people value individuality in all things, Vothrak observed. We value the freedom to choose, Daniel replied, even in decoration. They sat across from each other, and for a moment neither spoke. I have a proposal from the Imperial High Command, Vothrak finally said. They have reviewed the battle records, and they have made a decision. Daniel felt tension build in his chest. Go on. Humanity will be declared a protected species under Imperial law, and your world will not be subject to conquest. And furthermore, the Empire wishes to establish diplomatic relations. Daniel had not expected that. Why? Because you have taught us something valuable, Vothrak said. For centuries, the Empire has conquered through order and precision, and we believed our way was the only way, and you have shown us that chaos has its own strength. He paused and seemed to be choosing his words carefully. The High Command believes that humanity could be an ally rather than a subject, and your adaptive thinking could benefit the Empire, while our organizational capabilities could benefit you. Daniel considered this carefully. I will need to discuss this with Earth's governments, he said. But I have a question first on what happened to Admiral Krevnos. He has been removed from command and tactical officer. Janatara, who saved both our species from unnecessary destruction, has been promoted, and she will be the Empire's first ambassador to Earth. She disobeyed orders to do what was right. Daniel said, "That is very human of her." "Perhaps," Vothrak replied. "Or perhaps it is simply what any thinking being should do when faced with an immoral command." They talked for another hour about the possibility of peace, about trade and cultural exchange, about the lessons both species could learn from each other. When Vothrak finally left, Daniel stood at the observation window and looked at Earth Lieutenant Karen Price joined him. "Do you think we can trust them?" she asked. "I think we taught them to question their assumptions," Daniel replied. "And that is a good first step. We won through chaos." Karen said, "We survived through adaptation," Daniel corrected. "And we will build peace the same way, and by figuring it out as we go." Below them, Earth rotated peacefully, a planet that had been threatened with destruction, a species that had faced impossible odds, and through creativity, improvisation, and the courage to embrace chaos, humanity had survived. Sergeant Peter Cole stood on the repaired orbital platform and watched Valorian ships beginning their long journey home. Beside him, one of his Marines asked a question. "Sir, do you think they will come back?" Peter thought about the Valorian soldiers he had fought. They were brave and skilled and honorable in their own way. "Maybe," he said, "but if they do, they will come as friends, and because we taught them that sometimes the best strategy is to have no strategy at all."